Good evening, everybody. This is Cinnamon Noir. Welcome back to Castlevania Circle of the Moon. We're returning to the underground warehouse, where, even though we've been kicked around quite a bit, you might be surprised to realize that this is actually slightly less than halfway through the area. We've still got a lot of territory left to cover. And one of the interesting things about this area that I like a lot, actually, is that it has multiple different kinds of background design. So, you know, there's sort of more storytelling going on here in the sense of you're going from one area to another. That's certainly a more interesting aspect of this level in the gameplay, which, as we'll soon see, is mostly about pushing boxes around. Because, you know, they gave us that power last episode. They have to make us use it, right? So the enemies in here are pretty good, level design decent, puzzles, Puzzles in Castlevania games have never been a great fit, and they kind of push them a little too hard here. So here's a fairly basic box-pushing puzzle. You basically just need to work out what order you need to push these to the right in. And you need all three of them, which somewhat differentiates this from later puzzles in the same area. Harmony of Dissonance also had a couple of box-pushing puzzles. They did it much less, I would say, and more simply, and I think that's the right approach. Like I said, puzzles in Castlevania games either go light or don't do it at all. You know, some of the best Castlevania games, like Aria of Sorrow, have had barely any puzzle elements whatsoever. Symphony of the Night had some things I guess you could call puzzles, but it was more about finding something in one place and then just taking it to another. I don't really call those puzzles. But now that I think about it, they are kind of closer to what puzzles used to be, like in really old text adventures and adventure games like that. Like Atari, you know, Adventure for the Atari 2600. That one had puzzles that were basically just about bringing the right thing to the right place. You know, it's been a long time since Adventure. So more Thunder Armors here. Annoying enemies, but I never found them that difficult to deal with. Mainly with Thunder Armors, and this is something I actually like about them, they make them difficult by how they place them. It's totally different from, like, Poison Armors, where a Poison Armor in a room by itself is really annoying and difficult to deal with. Thunder Armor is not quite the same. And that's why I like one and dislike the other. Yeah, I don't know why I switched to the Stone Whip here. Kind of a strange decision. Especially since the Stone Whip is very slow. Can't imagine what I was thinking. And I get punished for it. Let's go back to the tried and true. Just boost my attack. Even though the DSS system in this game is really interesting and gives you lots of possibilities, I will say I spend most of this game just alternating between the one that increases my attack slightly and the one that increases my defense based on the map explored. It's... I don't know. It's difficult to say. A lot of the DSS skills in this game are either highly situational, or they're really powerful, but you can only get them by getting these really rare item card drops. So, in a lot of cases, the stuff you really want, the best stuff, you can't even use because it's from enemies that you almost never see, and they have like a 1% drop rate of the card. So you end up with, you know, the more common cards. Not that there aren't good combos there, because there are. But I don't know, I never felt that tempted to experiment with them. We will be seeing later on a lot of the different DSS combinations. I just won't be showing them off that much in regular gameplay. So sorry if that's disappointing. Anyway, moving on here. I'm actually not able to get that heart upgrade yet. I'm not sure if there's any way to get that besides coming back here later with the ability to fly. But in case you haven't figured it out, that is when we're going to be getting it. So let's just go for another box-pushing puzzle. This isn't quite the level where you have to start thinking about them yet, really. There's, I'd say, only one box-pushing puzzle in this where it kind of tests your brain a bit. You know, this one, it's fairly obvious. You were literally just pushing these two boxes. This is to the point where I would not even call this a puzzle. You just do what the game is blatantly showing you should do. I don't know, I have very mixed feelings about this. The fact that you push things so slowly is one of the things I don't like about it. I feel like maybe they should have found a way to contextualize box pushing with some kind of button so that you could do it faster, but you had to, you know, do more inputs than just running into it. Anyway, here we went into the Holy Armor, which is a very powerful enemy. You got to be careful with these guys. And another kind of interesting thing about them is their attack does light damage, but they are... the way they attack by either going high, middle, or low, and then sending out a beam, is sort of foreshadowing for one of the most difficult regular enemies in the game, which we'll see in the final area. So I guess these guys are sort of a way to, sharpen your saw against that kind of move, so you know how to position yourself best for it. Although, the enemies we're going to see that do a similar thing are so much harder that it doesn't even help you that much to train this. Incidentally, while I'm thinking about it, the enemy design in this game and stuff, in the last episode I complained to Koji Igarashi personally about the design of enemies in this game and how broken it is. I should not have done that, because it turns out, and for some reason I didn't think of this for the longest time, Koji Igarashi was not responsible for this game. His team, actually, the team that worked on Symphony of the Night, didn't even make this. This was made by a totally different internal Konami team who worked in Kobe, I think? And the Koji that you see sometimes in the credits for this game is actually a different guy named Koji. It's not Koji Igarashi, it's a guy named Koji Horie, I believe. So I'm very sorry, Iga, for tarnishing your your legacy inappropriately. It turns out Koji Igarashi didn't even like this game. He thought it was a mistake. Probably because it was so unbalanced and kind of broken, against the player. Because I will say a lot of Iga's games, because Iga's well known for the Metroidvanias rather than the classic old-fashioned Castlevania games, a lot of his games are easier on the player. They're more lenient, and they make it easier for you to, get through without being a super talented or skillful player. But actually, looking back on this game, even though I love Iga and I think his approach overall is a little better, I kind of like the way that this game preserves that difficulty of the older Castlevanias. I think it did a much better job than Iga himself was able to do when he did Order of Ecclesia, mostly because Iga wanted to make a game that was, pleasant to play through, that it was, fun. And the thing about the older Castlevanias is they're actually not like that. I'm not saying they're not fun, but fun isn't what they're designed for. They're designed to be challenging. And so this game, with its willingness to not be fun and to screw you over, kind of contains a little more of that feel of, this game will push you around. I don't know, it's kind of a curious thing. Anyway, we're running into some succubuses here. I think we already ran into them before in the Abyss Stairway. But here's where they show up properly. You may have also noticed for a second this is where the Grizzlies show up properly. We also saw them at the top level of the Chapel Tower, in that area we ran away from. But yeah, succubuses, I enjoy fighting them. They move around a little unpredictably, and they're basically harder versions of the Harpies. But they have a pretty cool design. I like the use of color in the palette of these enemies. I also like their ginger hair, which is an interesting choice. Maybe it's more anti-ginger sentiment, and we all know how much they've suffered. But, red hair just goes with evil characters. It works. So yeah, this room, one of the more vertical rooms in the game, which I kind of like. But at the same time, the fact that the succubuses are the only enemies in it does make it feel a little barren. I think that was kind of a mistake. They should have put some enemies on the, walking around on the platforms as well. So here we have the Grizzlies and the Archdemon, which we saw earlier. Oh, sorry, Archdemon. We saw him earlier as well, but just in a few bonus rooms. These Grizzlies can be very deceptive. It might seem to you that they're incredibly slow and, just stay far away from you. They can't get to you that fast. But their attack range is actually much larger than you'd think. So don't get too close to them. Make sure you keep them outside of their attack range, which you'll get to learn pretty quickly as soon as you get hit by one. They're very powerful enemies. So this is the only box-pushing puzzle in this area, and therefore the whole game, that I would say is actually kind of challenging. Kind of tests your brain in terms of which of these things you should break first and how you should move the boxes. But before you do that, you should get up here to get to a bonus room featuring a holy armor. And oh boy, I could really use an HP up right now. One interesting thing about this game that, like I was saying earlier about the difficulty, contrasted with other Metroidvanias, is that it really changes your play style, which, when I play a game like Portrait of Ruin, I tend to be playing kind of the same no matter what's happening. Save rooms are very evenly spaced, you feel secure, and so it's fun to just explore. In this game, you start out being cocky and overconfident, and then you get to the point where you are just being super careful and what's the right term? Conscientious about how you use your health. Not only because it's so easy to lose health, but also because you have a lot more to lose when you die, because the save rooms are spaced so far apart. You lose a lot more progress. So it adds back that sense of danger and risk that's not present in a lot of Metroidvanias. While I was playing this, I have to say, one thing it reminded me a lot of, funnily enough, was the game Demon's Souls, which is 3D. It's sort of totally different in a lot of ways. But where these two games are similar is their willingness to do things that a balanced game theoretically wouldn't, and they're willing to be broken, essentially. But also the fact that, like, they're difficult, but they make you feel good when you get through the whole game. And so they have that sort of challenge, where by being so difficult, it really shows how much you've grown as a player when you actually manage to get through it. Another thing that this game shares in common with Demon's Souls, is that the final boss, oh thank God for that HP up, or perhaps I should say in Demon's Souls' case, the penultimate boss, but it's basically the final real boss, is so freaking difficult and broken. In the case of Demon's Souls, he can literally de-level you, which is just, that's out of bounds. That's something like a game should not do, but it does. And sometimes it's right for a game to do what you're not supposed to do. But anyway, both of these games are so difficult that at the end, the final boss, I was compelled to cheat. This, by the way, is a really good example of not letting grizzlies get too close to you. So yeah, they can attack from farther away than you'd think. And another thing about grizzlies is, depending on how they pin you down, you might not be able to jump over them. These enemies have a very tall sprite, and they always knock you backwards. So you can't get through them just by rushing them. You can do that with this archdemon, for instance, but you cannot do it with the grizzlies. In case you're wondering why I'm going back, that's because even though I was lucky to get that health upgrade, I'm not going to press my luck. I need to go back to a save point. Just in case. Also, I get some more experience out of it, which is nice. So yeah, grizzlies are not quite as slow as they look. You might notice he's actually covering quite a bit of ground. It's kind of funny how that works. One unfortunate aspect of the way I've been playing this game is that I am now very low on hearts, so I won't be getting to use sub-weapons for quite a while. Oh, sorry, I was wrong. I was mixed up in terms of the map. Actually, the reason I went backwards is because I was done with everything I could do in that room. In order to get that final upgrade, I'm going to need some other tools. Also, I was wrong earlier. That box pushing puzzle in the last room is actually fairly easy. This is the one that kind of did my brain in. One thing that I think really gets you with 2D games like this, in which the camera tends to be a little zoomed out, I don't know how this is working, is that you can't see the whole puzzle at once. And, you know, unlike a puzzle game, for instance, I really like a game called Pushmo, where you push boxes around on these... you push... you push blocks around in order to get to the top of a structure. In Pushmo, you can zoom out and look at the whole puzzle at once. And that gives you a better idea of what you're supposed to be doing step by step. But that's because that's a puzzle game. It's designed from, you know, top to bottom to be puzzles. This game, it's not designed for that. And so there's nothing like that. So I was a little confused here. I was trying to get up there, when in fact, there's no way to solve the puzzle such that you can get through there. That's the way back out going in the other direction. What you really just need to do here is to just push 2 boxes down to the bottom. And so confusingly, in that one room earlier, the boxes reset themselves. Oh, sorry, the boxes didn't reset themselves when I left, even though arguably I'd kind of painted myself into a corner. Here they do reset themselves. So I'm not exactly sure how this level works in terms of that. It's possible that different rooms have different rules. So I think I finally realize here that what I need to do is I need to get one of these 2 blocks on top of this first block in such a way that I can still push it. And then I can push it over to the side, and that'll get me through. By the way, you can't push a block when there's another block on top of it, presumably just because they're so heavy. It is kind of funny, like, block-pushing puzzles in a context like this are very unrealistic, because, realistically, Nathan could just climb up the wall and climb through that little gap. He doesn't need to slide under it. It's not like he becomes smaller when he gets on his hands and knees. But oh well. So there's another pretty obvious bonus area in here, with a hippogriff in it. Not too difficult. Another good thing about this is we're very close to a save point here. This is actually fairly close to the end of the level. But there's still quite a few new enemies to introduce. So for instance, these guys, the forest armors, who are possibly, given when you encounter them, the easiest armor-type enemies in the game. Their attack is very slow and very easy to dodge. It only goes out right in front of them. And another thing about these guys is that you don't need to actually run away from them, because their attack is structured in such a way that you can duck underneath it and just attack them over and over again. And they don't move fast enough in order to close the gap between you and them when they do that. So if you're able to do that, I mean, these guys just become total chumps. I feel kind of bad for them. They also have a fairly low amount of health for armor enemies, at least compared to when you're seeing them. Oh, Cursed Ring. That's a lucky drop, but I wouldn't actually call it lucky. I wouldn't recommend using the Cursed Ring. I figured since these guys were like grass types, fire would be good against them, but it turns out it's not. These elemental whips really are not quite as useful as you'd think. It's best just to go with increase the damage directly. Kind of dispiriting, actually. Ooh, could have used that 30 minutes ago. It's kind of dispiriting to, put on what you think is a good elemental combination and find that it doesn't even do as much damage as just a 25% bonus. So we just had a new enemy type introduced, but here in this room we have two new enemy types. We have the Dryads here and then these Golems. Both, I have to say, fairly boring enemy types. The Golems just move towards you extremely slowly. I believe they don't even have attacks. Their only real trick with these Golems is that they might, deceive you by still being alive after you destroy their legs and they fall to the ground. They're worth a fair amount of experience points, so it's worth, taking care of them and finishing them off, even though it is slow. Like Golems in every Castlevania game, and pretty much any game, period. They're very slow, but they have very high defense. And then these Dryads, which is kind of weird. They don't look like Dryads in, mythology or most other Castlevania games, because there's no, element of them being women in addition to being trees, or, tree women. They're just trees that shoot out little ghost blobs. Very strange enemies, these. These guys may have inspired a later Castlevania enemy that I like a lot, which are I forget exactly what they're called. They're like flea man trees. They're these trees that spawn these weird little fruits that eventually they grow and grow and then they'll burst into a flea man, which you then have to defeat. So you have to lop all of the limbs off the tree so that it'll wither. I suppose those little holes in the tree are supposed to be, eyes or something like that, so maybe the tree is supposed to be alive, but who knows. By the way, that little sliding hole that we just saw, that is a way out of this area if you're doing badly, although I don't know why you'd use it, because there's a save room right here, and you'd have to go all the way back through the underground warehouse in order to get back here. Kind of a nasty trick. But that leads to that hole we saw at the beginning of the game, in the catacomb, with all the bomber skeletons. The best way of getting out of here, certainly, but not until you've defeated the boss. I would almost call that another trap, like the game just trying to trick you into leaving when you're not done. Who knows? One thing I will definitely say about this game is, and I think this is another thing Koji Igarashi didn't like about it, it seems very oriented toward grinding and playing the game over and over and over again. Not on different save files, I mean just, using the same file and defeating thousands of enemies, countless enemies, until you've got all the good stuff and you're way over leveled, and then everything's much easier. So maybe their idea of putting that there was that it is a good thing for you to have to go through the whole underground warehouse again, because you'll defeat more enemies and you'll be a higher level. That's kind of metagame. Right, so we're putting on the defense. And I'm using up my hard items because I don't want to grind for hearts. Yet. Let's just fight the next boss. And guess what? It is Death. Yes, Death himself. And funnily enough, even though Death is basically Dracula's right-hand man, his main servant, in this game, the Necromancer is the one that has this giant villain spiel, and Death says literally nothing, just starts attacking you. Pretty disappointing. Pretty far to fall for the, main man of Dracula. And I have to say also, this boss fight, kind of disappointing from the perspective of other Dracula fights. Dracula is normally supposed to be a highlight in Castlevania games. He certainly was in all of the, old school, linear kind of Castlevania games. But, I don't know, something about Konami, even after Iga took back over, From Symphony of the Night in 97, all the way through, I'd say, to probably Dawn of Sorrow. Well, no, it's Aria of Sorrow. Aria of Sorrow was a big comeback for Death, despite him still not getting any lines. Portrait of Ruin fixed that. But yeah, they just did weird things with Death. So in this first stage, kind of disappointing, he just has those little skeleton things he can shoot out. And he has the scythes, and he can summon orbs. But this second phase, which is deceptively difficult, especially when he does this move, which you might not notice, has actually increased my gravity, so now I can't jump or run away easily. And then that move, where he slams the ground, and if you are on the ground, he will do damage to you no matter where you are in the room. This stage of the fight is deceptively difficult. Since the scythes keep coming, all of these different weird attacks he can do, like spells, they're very surprisingly difficult. The other thing about Death, and this is why I hate this particular boss fight, I made a huge mistake and used up all of my sub-weapons in the first stage. Kind of dumb, because the first stage isn't that difficult, and you can get whip hits on him. In the second stage, Death's actual vulnerable part is like his shoulders or something. You can't hit any of the parts that are skeletal. I think it's only the fleshy ones that are hittable. Not only do you have to get within range of his sickle claw attack in order to hit him, but also you're close enough that, like, he can run into you when you're that close. So it's actually a really bad idea to be that close to him. I'm in a bad position here. Essentially, the only way I can damage him is to stand right up close to him and fire out the whip. The problem with that is, when I'm close to him, he'll sickle me like that, and it's really hard for me to run away with the scythes. So I keep getting scared away from the only position where I can do damage. I hate bosses that work like this, and there's a lot of them in this game. One reason why boss fights are a particular, low light for me in this game, among others. And in fact, I'm about to get killed here in the most embarrassing way possible. I get killed by the ground smash. But it is kind of becoming a tradition for me to be killed by Death. Let's try again. This is me after I've done a little bit of grinding to get some hearts back, and learning that I should save those crosses for the second stage, when I really need them. So like I said before, he can send out those little bone spurs, which are very strange. I don't know what he's doing to his skeletal body to make that happen. It's weird. A lot of Death's attacks seem more magical, like this one in particular. That little green orb attack is probably his hardest and most damaging attack in his first stage. Other than that, when you think about it, he's mostly just wandering around the room. But yeah, that bone spur thing, that doesn't look like a magical spell. It looks like him somehow deforming his body to attack you. Kind of gruesome, actually. One thing I do like about this area is these weird little paintings of biblical scenes in the background. At least I assume that's what they are. They're so low res, it's kind of hard to tell. I couldn't tell you what biblical stories they're illustrating, if any. But it kind of looks like there's people and demons flying around. Yeah, it is kind of weird in this room. It's awkwardly set up. So the two paintings, which are definitely the most interesting things visually in the room, are on either side of it. And then in the middle, there's just this huge empty space of, like, bookcases and a big skull with curtains coming out of it. Death definitely needs a new interior decorator. I would recommend Juiced from Harmony of Dissonance, because he has excellent furnishing sense. If I ever do a Let's Play of that, you'll definitely see that's on full display. Okay, so we finally get him into Phase 2. I'm going to put my defense on, because he is much more damaging in this phase. I have to say, in addition to not liking his attacks in this phase, like how cheap I think he is, I just don't like the appearance of this. He looks like some weird snail. Like, what the hell does this have to do with Death? Definitely something that only, like, Japanese game designers would think of doing. Or, like, Junji Ito or something. His fleshy parts I also don't like. The fact that it suddenly goes from Death as a skeleton and you attack his skeleton to Death has meat parts and then skeleton and, like, bones coming out of them, and the bones you can't attack and the fleshy parts you can, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And he dies as he lived, making absolutely no sense whatsoever. He gets sucked into a black hole. Is Death from another dimension? Is that why he's a snail? Like, it's really hard to tell. I get the feeling there's a really fascinating backstory behind a lot of this game that you never get told. To be fair, even though I do own the GBA version of this game, I've never read the manual, so who knows? Maybe Death had some amazing things to say in the manual. One thing that is not amazing is the item we get from this. Definitely the most boring, prosaic item in the game. It literally just cleans up some water so that we don't get poisoned to death when we enter it. Like I've said, I think, way too much by now. This game spent way too much... Well, I should say spent too much time. This game used up the best mobility upgrades really early on, and the result is that for like 3 bosses in a row at this point, we've had the most lackluster upgrades from beating bosses imaginable. This is another way in which this game is kind of like the older Castlevania games, because in those games when you fought a boss, you didn't get any power-up. Your reward was literally just you get to go to the next stage. But, you know, Symphony of the Night... Well, now that I think about it, Symphony of the Night didn't really give you upgrades for bosses either. But a lot of the upgrades were hidden in areas that were directly behind bosses, so it sort of felt that way. And then in later Igavanias, so to speak, that concept was very much codified to you get a reward after a boss, you get an upgrade. And, you know, in this game, they do have that. You do technically get an upgrade after each boss, it's just that some of them are so lame that it makes you wonder why they bothered. You know, the last 3 upgrades we've gotten have literally been 1, blow up 3 statues by hitting a switch. 2, you get to move boxes around. And then 3, you get to clean up the water in one specific area. Which is so on the nose, it's like, obviously now you can get to that area. But there's no puzzle element to it. You've almost certainly seen the underground waterway by now. And now it's just, oh, well, this cleans up the water. I guess I can go there. It's very interesting, because the underground warehouse, I would say, is actually a pretty good level overall, but it ends on a real sour note. Yeah, here we are at the bottom of the pit. I've become very accustomed to this place. So you can, of course, just go all the way back up through the underground warehouse to the Triumph hallway, if you want. But I think this is what they intended, because it's faster, and also because they pull a kind of neat little trick that we're going to see in a moment, which it seems like they wanted to surprise you with. So when you go back into this room, you will see, now we have much harder enemies here. The Grizzlies from the last area, along with an enemy we haven't even seen before, Arachne, who, if I recall correctly, was not in Symphony of the Night, and so this might be an original enemy, but she shows up in a lot of later Igavanias as well. This is kind of a pulling the rug out from under you moment when this happens, you know? Even though enemies have been replaced with harder enemies in parts of this game before. Ooh, that's a good item. Not taking off the luck ring, because that's really good. Oh, sorry. Yes, I am. I guess I don't need luck anymore. I don't need intelligence, I don't need luck, I just need brawn. By the way, I did cut this off here because I had a very long play session that I decided to turn into 2 episodes. So this is going to be the end of it here. Sorry, this is so awkward. Good night, everybody. I'll see you next time.